That is right. Today I want to talk about budget, affordable, kind of easy on the wallet SSDs for your PS5. This is a subject I talked about a lot in the second half of 2021, and now at the start of 2022, a number of you who are maybe looking at some of the money you found in your stocking this Christmas, or you took a sensible move, saw your payday coming early and thought, do you know what, I'm going to buy me an upgrade for my PS5 that may or may not have just arrived if the scalpers haven't stopped you, and you are thinking about upgrading that storage, and you've looked at the cost of SSDs and gone, what? For what? 100, 200 nicker for a terabyte? Get out. Get right out. Get out. That's right. The cost of SSDs, such as the ones that are utilised in the PS5, NVMe, M2 SSDs in PCIe Gen 4 architecture there, are not cheap indeed. Some of the SSDs that they are recommending at the very top end knock around from about $200 to about $230 per terabyte, which is a lot. When you think about a hard drive of 1 TB, knocks around for about 50 or 60 quid at the very, very top end there, outside of SSD at the very least, NVMe. But today I want to talk about the more affordable end. I want to talk about the SSDs that are arriving at a much more affordable price point. These are SSDs that knock around for about $130 to maybe $150 per terabyte at the top. They are all compatible with PS5. They have all been tested on this channel, and of the many that I've talked about here on the channel, these are the best 5 budget SSDs for upgrading your PS5 at the start of 2022. Now, it's worth highlighting a few things early doors. The SSDs I'm going to talk about today are SSDs that for one reason or another have had to reduce their price. The reason being maybe that there is a newer, faster version of them, or that their architecture itself does not push out the high level of performance that most people deem acceptable and necessary for PS5. Indeed, if you go to PlayStation's own compatibility listings, not only do they recommend that you make sure you have yourself a heatsink, but on top of that, they also recommend that you use an SSD that has in excess of 5,500 megabytes per second sequential read. However, for those of you that have ever tested an SSD in a PS5, you'll know that the SSD benchmarks that are put on the outside of most SSDs that say what the read speed is, that sequential read speed, their big data, is not the same as the PS5's own internal benchmark. And some SSDs, for example, such as the Samsung 980 Pro, which has a marketed 7,000 megabytes per second sequential read, when you put it in the PS5's own benchmark rates that drive at 5,600. So it's not the same when you look at that recommended benchmark speed. And indeed, a lot of the SSDs that I've tested recently, some of them have got reported PC benchmarks of 5,000 megs. And when you put them in the PS5, it spits out 5,600 to 5,800 megs. And they're able to play the games, and in our extensive loading tests, they have loaded the games as fast as the internal console. So all of the SSDs I'm going to talk about today, and I know this is a long intro, thanks for bearing with me, are SSDs that not only will 100% work in the PS5 system, but with all of my testing that you can check out in all the videos I've done this year, alongside all my usual DAS, NAS sort of stuff, show that they do load the games as fast, and in some cases faster, than the internal PS5 SSD. These 5 SSDs, although they are going to be in an order when I present them to you, one is not necessarily better than another. They've all been picked for a specific reason. So when you watch this video, make sure you watch all 5 and you work out what your priorities are. Is it the price point? Is it the value? Is it the durability? Is it the performance? Or is it a little bit of all of them? Because each of the SSDs today are one of those. So pick which one of those factors is the most important to you and your purchase, and then from there you'll hopefully have the right answer. But for now, that's enough of that, and let's get straight into my first recommended budget SSD for PS5. Now, the Addlink A95 by far is the fastest SSD here on the table. It's also the only SSD here on the table with 176 layer NAND inside. It's the only SSD on the table that has the Firecuda E18 controller as well. This SSD has performance that challenges the likes of the WD Black, the Seagate Firecuda 530, the Samsung 980 Pro. Why is this SSD in the budget list, I can hear you wondering. This is meant to be the budget SSDs. That sounds like a premium grade SSD. Indeed, it arrives with one of the most impressive heat sinks that I've shown here on the channel. Why am I holding it like this? Because of my review, when I had to remove this heatsink, I found out it uses pre-adhesive putty for the thermal there, not just some crappy little thermal pad that flips apart. This is an incredibly enterprise grade SSD put together here for gamers. But the price tag is spot on. It is priced as the lowest priced 7K SSD on the market right now. And with the inclusive heatsink and the compatibility and the performance that we tested inside the PS5, the A95 is easily the best performing drive of all the ones I'm going to talk about today. But I'm listing it because of its price, because of its value, to be more precise. This SSD gives you the very best possible for that architecture at that price point there. But it is worth highlighting, it does come with one downside, and this is going to be a real consumer kick in the pants. Stock levels are rubbish. You try and get this, it is out of stock 3 times out of 5. I first talked about this drive, I believe, back in September, October time, and since then, this SSD sells and then goes out of stock. I'm not the only one talking about it, but this SSD, for all of its goodness, there isn't a lot of stock. The company doesn't have, from what I can see, the manufacturing power of your WDs, your Samsungs, your Seagates. The result is that as good as it is, it's generally very hard to come by. And when it is in stock, it sells through very quickly. So again, great budget choice, by far the best performer of all the SSDs here on the table today, with an inclusive heatsink as well. But at the same time, a bit of a nightmare to get hold of. Next up, we lean back into that word value once again with the Sabrent Rocket PCIe 4. Now, Sabrent was one of the earliest brands to really flex its muscles into the world of PCIe Gen 4 SSDs. Indeed, they have 4 different PCIe Gen 4 SSD ranges from their brand, more than anyone else at the moment, by the way. No other brand has that many different PCIe Gen 4 arms to their business. Now, the Sabrent PCIe 4, because of the growing popularity of the Rocket 4 Plus, which is their premium drive, the result has been that the price of this drive has gone down exponentially, down to around about $120 to $130 per terabyte, often on sale whenever there's a seasonal sale, your Black Fridays, your Boxing Day sale, your your January sale. But on top of that, its architecture is spot on there. It arrives with that Firezone E16 controller. It's got a lovely level of durability there. I believe it's 0.7 drive writes per day. I might be wrong there. Hopefully the text on screen will back me up one way or the other. It arrives with the heat shield there on the top, which is very thick there. So it's already included on board. And for installation in the PS5, it has to be said, really straightforward, recognised straight away, great performance, and still was reported at 5,600 megabytes per second by the PlayStation's own internal benchmark there. Again, Sabrent is one of those brands that's a little bit of a victim of its own success due to its its Rocket 4 selling so well, particularly bundled with its premium PS5 heatsink. It has led to this SSD becoming exceptionally affordable. And certainly if you're looking at a budget SSD to upgrade your PS5 and you're not looking at that high tier with that ridiculous close to $200 or more per terabyte, it's a great SSD upgrade there, and it's one from a company that's been involved in PCIe Gen 4 SSDs for longer than pretty much anyone else outside of the top 3. And when I talk about brands that have been involved in the SSD market for a long time, come on, Seagate. They have been in the market for so long, and they are another brand that has fleshed out exponentially into the PCIe market there. And again, they've got sub-ranges. They've got the Barracudas, they've got the Iron Wolf, and the Firecuda. Each range very targeted at different kinds of users, and Firecuda most certainly being at the gamers. And much like Sabrent, they were one of the earliest brands to jump into PCIe Gen 4 SSD territory there. Now, when they did that, unlike WD and Samsung, who kind of released their products 5 to 6 months later, their SSDs, although first in the market, didn't hit the 7K, and this is the Firecuda 520 there. The result is that although their SSD was first 5 or 6 months later, other brands introduced much faster SSDs into the market. They got there with SSDs that were pretty fast at 5,000 megabytes per second. I think it's 5.5 megabytes per second there at PCIe Gen 4. But it didn't take a vast amount of time before other brands, who arguably took longer, managed to release their 7,000 megabytes per second SSDs on the market. Now, of course, about 6 to 7 months later, Seagate then released the 530 series, an insanely fast SSD, but that meant, much like the Sabrent example, the knock-on effect, with the 520 now being lower price significantly in places. You can pick this up for about 120 to 130 if you shop around megabytes, dollars I should say, and that is the 5 to 5,500 megabytes per second SSD. Again, we've done tons of testing on the PS5, works absolutely great. On top of that, it arrives with data recovery services built in. It's also a superior architecture of the E16 build compared with the Sabrent that we've talked about earlier. And ultimately, it's just a great SSD. When it was released on the market back in 2000, very early 2020, and now in 2022, when you're looking at your budget upgrades there, do not be surprised if this drive, thanks to the larger geared 530 drive arriving on the market, receiving even better prices as 2021 evolves. Which brings us neatly into our final two SSDs. This is the T-Force Cardea A440. Now, again, lots of SSD brands have arrived in the market and kind of flexed their muscles and released a few different releases in PCIe Gen 4. Team Group, with their T-Force series, did it in a much more incremental way with the Cardea A440. And they released a special Pro PS5 edition, obviously super enterprise priced, and they released a kind of sub-middle ground SSDs as well. But this one here, the Team Group A440, is a 7,000 rated SSD. But it also arrives not only at a price point that challenges most of the SSDs in my top 5 here, but it also arrives with two heatsink options. It arrives with a larger, chunkier geared SSD heatsink here with angular cutting there, with that line across the middle directly over where the controller lives. It is designed in that way. On top of that, it arrives with a surround as well for the base level of that heatsink to attach it and keep it clasped around. But there's also a graphene heat shield. This is an incredibly thin metallic panel, much like the Sabrent one we talked about earlier on, that gives you an option of two different means of heat dissipation inside your PS5 system. We are even able to just get the lid down on the M2 slot of the PS5 when installing this upgrade here with the heatsink. And when we did our testing, this is the last Phison SSD I'm going to talk about here today. But of all of the ones that I've mentioned, this is one that arrives at, if not an identical, then an incredibly similar, less than $10 price point between the other three SSDs we talked about today. But it arrives with those two different heat sinks and a 7,000 megabytes per second read rated there by Team Group themselves. It's a great SSD. The NAND quality has been upgraded as well in the product's lifetime. And on top of that, again, as mentioned, the Cardea T4 series there, the A440, has been broken down into subgroups as well, which has led to, of course, the price point being a great deal more affordable. Overall, there's only one reason that it's not in last place in terms of all of its added accessories, and that reason is very, very small indeed. Let's crack on with my last pick. My last pick is the Patriot Viper, the VP4300 SSD, another 7,000 megabytes per second reported sequential SSD. But again, although arriving at a similar price point to all of the ones on the table, again, call it $10, $15 out. For me, it's the most complete package of an SSD, and in a number of ways you can see how it remains so attractive and affordable at the same time. First and foremost, it takes advantage of a different controller. Unlike the Phison SSD controller that has been used in all four of the SSDs I've talked about thus far, this one arrives with the InnoGrit Rainer controller, the IG5236. That is an alternative to the Phison. It's more affordable, and it means that during the architecture build of this SSD, it's allowed the price to be a little bit more flexible and allow end users to get a lot more for their money. Bear in mind, I mentioned that this may be about $10 to $15 more than some of the more expensive SSDs I talked about today, but it not only arrives with a graphene heat shield, just like the one we talked about, and it's a much thicker one as well, but on top of that, it arrives with an incredibly slimline heatsink. So this is a real heatsink. It's it's got the air design there to pass it over where the controller specifically lives on that SSD. But it's the sheer size of it there. It finds a great middle ground. If you look at the likes of that Addlink heatsink there and how big that is, and you look at just how small this heatsink is here. Indeed, if you compare this heatsink to that Cardea that we've talked about, you can see they found a lovely slimline heatsink there, which is exactly what I know a lot of users want to have for the more confined space of the M2 SSD upgrade expansion slot of the PS5. Again, when I did my original review of this and comparison series, I talked about how much I love the design of this thing. It reminds me of some of my action figures. That's right, I've got action figures, come at me. But just generally, as a complete package, this SSD not only arrives with 7,000 megabytes per second sequential read and 6,800 megabytes per second sequential write at the larger capacities, but with those two very well crafted heat dissipation methods included at no additional cost, remember, because at least two of the SSDs I talked about today, you have to pay more to add those extra bits. It is a great SSD, and thanks to that integrated controller and that more creative and more affordable, flexible pricing, it makes it, for me, the best all-rounder complete package of all of the value series SSDs on the table today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, do let me know by clicking like, as it helps me understand what I'm doing right. If you are looking at getting an SSD for your PS5, just remember that all the SSDs I talked about today are not the highest tier in terms of performance or durability. These are ones that are affordable for a reason. They're all great SSDs. And if you're on a tight price point and you want to make sure that when you do buy an SSD, you leverage that money a little bit more towards capacity and heat dissipation than you do towards top-end performance, any of the 5 SSDs today will certainly tick the box for you there. If you want to learn more as we cover this subject as much as we can, because we've really dug deep and there's still more to cover, click subscribe to be notified about more content like this as it gets published in 2022. And of course, if you do want to learn more and need some help, a little bit of free advice, use the free advice section and the links in the description over to NAS Compares. The free advice section is manned by 2 people, me and Eddie the web guy. We answer every single inquiry. It might take us an extra day or so because it does get quite busy down there, but we answer everyone. We do nothing with your email. There's a donate button. Use it, ignore it. It's your call. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.